I am Vernon Schrade, and I was born June 4th, 1923 on Martha Lane, which is off of Schrade Road, over in the mud flat. I'm nothing but a country, cotton-picking country boy. I'm certainly out of place up here trying to speak to such a distinguished bunch of people. But I like to talk. I love people. And I love Rowlett. I would like to read a little bit to you, a few statistics and whatnot, and then maybe show you some of my junk, and then maybe answer a few questions. But I'm very glad to see you in the Rowlett Chamber of Commerce helping to build a great city. In years to come, you will look back and be very proud of your contribution to Rowlett and all of your friends. This day will mean something to you to talk about in your later years. I'll guarantee you'll be proud of it and you'll benefit by it. I've been through many Chamber of Commerce meetings, and not the first ones, because actually in 1924 there was more or less a community Chamber of Commerce, but in 72 I think it was, we revitalized and got chartered. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rowlett history and some dates and whatnot, and I could stand here and talk all night and about Rowlett and things that have happened, but I know we don't have that much time. But settlers first started coming to this area about 1850. The community north of this area was called Pleasant Valley. The community east of this area was called Morristown and Cheesy. Now Cheesy was located on what is now Schrade Road. There was a switch track there, and my father shipped cotton from there for many years. Some people call it Casey, but we called it Cheesy. In the late 1800s, the Rowlett area was noted for the good wood to be cut for firewood and lumber. My daddy came out here in 1883, I believe it was. But this country all had good timber, oak, elm, and whatnot, made good firewood and lumber and whatnot. And the main occupation was cutting wood, hauling it to Dallas, and using it for firewood and whatnot, because it didn't have any gas and electricity and all that good stuff. But good farmland followed the clearing of the timber, and people began to come in here, especially immigrants. My father came from Germany, wound up here, over here on Del Rock area, which was called a German settlement. A lot of German farmers. Very good land. This is some of the best land in the state of Texas, especially this is under Lake Ray Hubbard. That was our best land. But good farmland followed the clearing of the timber. In about 1880, the Rowlett area became known as Morris, the name given to the post office. In about 1889, Morris was changed to Rowlett. It is believed to have been named after Dr. Daniel Rowlett, who led a colony to this area, and which Rowlett Creek, they named Rowlett Creek first. And then, I don't know whether Rowlett took its name after the creek or after Dr. Rowlett, but we assume he took it after Dr. Daniel Rowlett. By 1892, some stores were being built mostly along the Dallas-Greenville Railroad, which later became the MKT in Cheesy, now Schrade Road, and near what is now old downtown Rowlett. And in 1892, 93, and 96, several stores were built up on what's now the square by J.W. Kirby, G.E. Kirby, Patrick McEntee, and several others in what is now downtown Rowlett. Transportation consisted of horse and buggies, horses, mules, and wagons. was no cars in Rowlett at that time, according to my knowledge. In 1892, Dr. W.A. Maupin came to Rowlett, and in 1898, his brother, Dr. Jim Maupin, came to town. They traveled all hours of the day and night by horseback, buggies, and later by automobile. Dr. Austin Maupin delivered me into this world for the big sum of $2.50. He used to live right across the street over there right across from City Hall. In 1909, Rowlett's first bank, the Citizens Bank, was built. The bank building and the other 3 buildings faced what is now Coyle Street. In fact, these buildings are still up there. The bank building belongs to me, the vault's still in it, the safe's still in the vault. But they used to face the other way because that was the highway of where Coyle Street is, and then it changed it around in about 1918 or somewhere and faced the other way. In 1918, when the main highway was changed to which is now Main Street, the bank building was added on to and faced the new highway, and the other buildings were also put faces on this end instead of the other end. A lot of the Rowlett land area had been cleared by now and provided rich, fertile black land on which cotton grew well. Instead of wood, cotton rapidly became the life-supporting industry in Rowlett. It began back in the 20s, I guess, and cotton really hit its peak here in about the 40s. This was real good cotton country. My daddy was a general 48 years, Mr. Coyle was 60 years, and getting lots of cotton here. Dan Housley built the first cotton gin around the turn of the century. The railroad had been built in about 1882, giving cotton and wood shipping a boost. In 1921, Patrick McEntee's heirs donated the downtown Rowlett public square to the town of Rowlett. This is a public square up there where the big opening is, and that was donated by the Patrick McEntee family. In 1969 and 70, the highway through town was changed to 6, then 7, then Loop 372, and today is Main Street. In 1894, the first Christian church was built. That's this building. This was the first Christian church building. I think this is the building. I'm not sure whether this is it or was another one, but I think this was it, and they celebrated their 100th birthday here in 1994. In 1899, the Catholic Church was built. It used to sit on the north end of town, just north of the square, no, west of the square, and it was moved up on Hickok Road, and it's a beautiful chapel now. If you ever get a chance, go see it. That's the oldest, I believe it's the oldest Catholic church in the diocese now. But anyway, it was over 100 years old. 1895, the Methodist Church was built down on this end of town. 1921, the First Baptist Church was built. 1924, electricity came to part of Rowlett. In 1929, gas was piped to Rowlett. There's a little story about electricity coming to the square. Mr. Coyle and Mr. D. Oliver agreed to put electricity in their cotton gin. They used to have 3 gins here if they would bring electricity to them, so the power company brought electricity down to the square. And then in 1929, the natural gas was piped into town. In late 20s and early 30s, a bad depression came. Living conditions were terrible. Everybody had to work in the fields. And I just barely remember this, but it was tough. There was no money. You lived on eggs and milk and butter and your cows and your hogs. And there was a little bit of bartering went on, but there was no money at all, except the bootleggers. A few of the bootleggers had a little money. Entertainment in the early days consisted of picnics, country dances, ball games, sewing, hunting, fishing, and so forth. Rowlett faded away during the Depression, which was in the late 20s and early 30s, mostly during the early 30s. In 1941, Rowlett began to rebound from the Depression. Mechanized farming came about and prosperity began to take place. Cotton became a big money crop after the Depression and flourished until Lake Ray Hubbard was built and covered up most of our cotton land, and we went out of business, went broke in the gin business. After World War II, the Army had taken over most of the trains, and soon civilian passenger service ceased on the MKT Railroad, and in 1951 the Katy Depot closed where it was located on Richard Street. It used to be right across the track where Butch Lambert's garage is now. And they used to, back in the early days, over on Schrade Road, the railroad went parallel with Schrade Road at that time before Lake Ray Hubbard was built. And my father told me in the early days you could go out on the railroad track and flag your hat and stop a train, ride to Dallas for 35 cents. I don't know whether they did in Rowlett or not. Of course, they had a depot here later, but at those times they would stop and pick you up. So they said. But like I said, 1951 they closed the depot, tore it down, moved it off, and we shouldn't have never let it left, but we did. 1952, Rowlett became incorporated. Before this, of course, we had a town and town council and began to grow a little bit, but in 1954, Rowlett drilled the first water well on Main Street. It was sitting right out here where the park is. And there's a little story behind that I'll tell you hurriedly if you don't mind. We were too poor to sell bonds. Nobody would buy our bonds in Rowlett. And there wasn't any water in Rowlett. We had cisterns. We hauled water from Garland and different places. Outdoor toilets all over town. No bathroom. And Mr. Coyle, J. Ed Coyle, who was my father-in-law, ran the gin. Mr. J.H. Bueller ran the general merchandise store. Got together and decided we were going to have a water well in Rowlett. So neither one of them had the money, but Mr. Coyle went to Garland to Mr. Davis, who was his friend, Mr. Rip Davis in the bank, and said, "Rip, I need $35,000. And he said, "Ed, what in the world do you need $35,000 for?" He said, "I want to drill a well." He said, "Where?" He said, "In Rowlett." He said, "Well, that's over the limit. I can't loan you that much money." And Mr. Coyle said, "Rip," I won't say what he said. He said, "Rip," I said I needed $35,000. He said, "Okay, Ed, I understand." He let him have $35,000. Mr. Bueller put up $10,000, and they bought the bonds, and that's how we got the water well drilled in Rowlett. There's a lot of history behind that. 1960, Rowlett had a population of 1,009. 1966, part of Bonnie and Clyde movie was made on Main Street on the Burkhart place north of Rowlett High School. I helped set up the props. Edward Burkhart and I helped set up the props to make the shot of two of Bonnie and Clyde. If you ever see Bonnie and Clyde and see the old Model A Ford and a picket fence out in front of an old white house, that was it, sitting right down there where that substation is. 1969, Lake Ray Hubbard was finished, providing Rowlett and others with approximately 22 miles of shoreline. I'll go back to late 1800s, Rowlett's first schools were Big A and Cornstalk College, Rowlett School, and Fuquay School. In the early 1900s, the schools had very small libraries, or a small room for a library, and a larger library was located in the courthouse in Dallas. It had a county library. The building where City Hall is today was our main school until 1965, when we were forced to give up our school district and merge with Garland. There's a long story behind that. A lot of people said, "Why don't we have our own school? Why did we get rid of it?" Unfortunately, I was president of the school board, and I caught a lot of heat over it. When the state director of education comes up and tells you if you don't join somebody, we're going to put you with somebody. We had no alternative but to go to Garland, who had the best school system in Texas, and beg to get in. They took us. That's how come it's in Garland. In 1974, Coyle Middle School was built. 1979, Rowlett Elementary on Carla Drive was built. Many schools have been built since then. Rowlett's first park was Herforth Park, built in 1973, just east of the square here. 1982, Safeway opened our first supermarket on Highway 66 and Rowlett Road. That was up here where Brookshire's was before it closed, on Rowlett Road in 66. From 1970 to 1980, Rowlett population doubled. Since then, it has more than doubled again and is receiving approximately 75 to 100 families a month. Now I put that note in there, I think last year, whenever we was on such a boom here. I don't know whether that's still happening or not, but there's a lot of people coming to Rowlett. Craig or some of them might could tell you more about that than I can. But Rowlett was blessed with many good people, but it had a few rough characters too. It was said that a drunk boarded the eastbound Katy train out of Dallas, and the conductor came through checking tickets and destinations. He asked the drunk where he was headed. The drunk said, "To hell." The conductor says, "Okay, I'll put you off in Rowlett." Also, we have some famous people buried in Rowlett. Up here in Big A Cemetery, Mr. Pete Welk's buried up there, and Pete's, I didn't know him. He was buried, he was electrocuted just when I was a baby. I knew his brothers, wonderful family of people. But Pete was the first white man electrocuted from Dallas County, and I think in the state of Texas. And he's buried up here in Big A Cemetery. Also, there's a cemetery on Cheesy Road that the first man buried in that cemetery was killed by a concerned citizen. A lot of people back in those early days took the law in their hands. And if you ever read the history of Dallas, a lot of things that happened in Dallas. In the book of Dallas, History of Dallas, there's an article in there about a group from Rowlett led by a man named L.F. McShan, a colored man. It was my neighbor. Uncle Mac went with a group to Dallas and went into jail, went upstairs and got the man out that had raped a little girl. They took him, let him down on a rope, took him down to Munger Avenue and his arch over Munger Avenue. They hung him on that arch. And in Dallas history, it'll say he hung him off a pole, but my daddy said it didn't. Said he hung him off that arch, and he showed it to me many a time. And he was a colored man, but he was a very excellent, good man. He used to come and wait on me when I was a baby, and him and his wife, I'd go to their house, and they was always poking cake and sausage and biscuits at me, and he was just some of the best people in the world. But he's buried over on Del Rock Road, Uncle Mac is, and A&M. There's some very prominent people that he was one of the leaders in the colored settlement. We had a colored settlement down that end of town, and Uncle Mac and George Ross and a few others were some of the very famous people. There are just a lot of things that I could stand up here and tell you and talk about, but I don't want to bore you to death. I've got several versions of talking about Rowlett and about country life in Rowlett, but I might just touch a little bit on hard times in Rowlett. When I was coming up walking to school, and had to walk to school over at Del Rock, it was all mud, and I was talking to the judge, I think it was a while ago, or Mr. William one, about having to milk cows. And we had to get up and do our chores and milk the cows and feed the hogs and all before we went to school and when we got home from school. And you can imagine what the poor teachers had to put up with after us kids getting up, milking the cows, bogging around in the mud, and didn't have time to go clean up now. We went on to school like we were. So it was pretty tough stuff. And as I said, back in the Depression days, there was no money. It was just, you had to barter for what you got or live on what you raised. One little interesting thing here I'd like to read to you, and then I'll show you some of my junk. This was rules for teachers in 1872. You school teachers ought to enjoy this. It says, teachers each day will fill the lamps and clean the chimneys. And some of you may not know what a lamp is, but I had to study with lamplight, kerosene lamplight myself. We didn't have electricity until up in the 40s. And it's mighty tough trying to get an education by lamplight, I'll tell you. But school had lamplights hanging up on the side, the walls. But each teacher will bring a bucket of water and a scuttle of coal for the day's session. They burned coal after they got sort of up in the days above the wood burning. Third, make your pens carefully. You may whittle nibs to the individual taste of the pupils. Men teachers may take one evening each week for courting purposes, or 2 evenings a week if they go to church regularly. Number 5, after 10 hours in school, the teacher may spend the remaining time reading the Bible or other good books. Women teachers who marry or engage to unseemly conduct will be dismissed. Every teacher should lay aside from each day a goodly sum of his earnings for his benefits during his declining years, so that he will not become a burden on society. Any teacher who smokes, uses liquor in any form, frequents pool or public halls, or gets shaved in a barber shop will give good reason to suspect his worth, intention, integrity, and honesty. The teacher who performed his labor faithfully and without fault for 5 years will be given an increase of 25 cents per week. So you teachers ought to feel proud. 1872, it wasn't so good. I want to show you a few things. This is a syrup bucket. We had sorghum syrup, made our own syrup. That's what we carried our lunch to school in. Mr. Clarence Rowan used to live right across Muddy Creek there. Had a barber shop in Del Rock, and this is what he cut hair with. And I'll tell you what, when these things get dull, they'll pull all your hair out. It hurt. And the first barber shop in Rowlett is where my plumbing shop was here on the square. My son's still there. That building's over 100 years old. Mr. Dewey Rowan and his brother built that building. It was sitting right over about where the planning department is. And when you wore your shoes out, you didn't go get a new pair. Your daddy took a shoe hammer and he'd go get a gin belt and cut a piece of leather and had a last, and he'd take and put a sole on it. You keep wearing them shoes. Of course, when I was a little kid, they didn't have any fences. We had open range, and this, some of you probably have seen these. This is a branding iron. You get hot and you put a brand on your cow so that you know where your cow was. And they got out there in the woods and everybody else's. And since you didn't have any fences, you hung this on the old cow's neck. So when you went to milk, you'd know where to go look for her. She may be this way or this way, but had bells on the cow's neck so it could keep up with them. And ladies, this is what you done your fancy ironing with. That's a hot iron. You put that on a wood stove, leave it there and get hot, and then do your ironing. As I said, this is what you went to the barn to feed the cows with and horses, and you had a lamp similar to this, study by. You went to Storm House, you took one of these with you, that and an axe to kill the snakes. There was plenty of them too. You went to the field to work. This was your water container, sometime we'd wrap a tow sack around it, make it stay cool for at least 5-10 minutes anyway. Stick a corn cob in it, and I'll tell you, the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life when I worked in the field with the employees was to work with a bunch of people that chewed tobacco and dipped snuff. We all had to drink out of this same jug. That was tough. Didn't think anything about it. Everybody done it. This is part of the misery part of it here. If you haven't seen a cotton patch, you can go up to Cooper, Texas, where I have a ranch up there, and they still raise cotton. Got fields of it. And when I was a kid, you go to the field and you'd take one of these, and if you was about 12 years old, they'd put one about this size on you. But if you'd already got up 17, 18 years old, they put a 14-foot sack on you. And you'd pick until you give out and your back hurts bad, then you get down on your knees. And this was knee pad. You put on knee pads on your knees and crawl a while and pick that way till you give out. And then you'd switch back and get back up and walk again. You'd fill that sack full. You'd take it to the wagon, hang it on the scales, weigh it, crawl up in the wagon, unload it, get back, get you a drink of that snuffy water, and go back to work. Now, I'll tell you what, this is not very nice to talk about this after supper, but I got something here I want to show you and just see. I don't see how intelligent you people are now. You all seem very intelligent to me, and just got a lot of knowledge. Does anybody know what that is? It's a what? What, honey?
Chamber pot to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, but it wasn't in. That's what it was. But it says, "Do not empty this toilet out of train window." When I was a little bitty boy, this is what you had in the restroom on wooden cars on trains come through Rowlett. That was your restroom. But it said, "Don't throw it out the window." The old boys that stayed out in the woods herding cows or going to West Texas, there's still some of them doing this. Every one of them had one in his saddlebag. That's what he warmed and cooked his beans in. That's a cast iron skillet. Now, I had the old ringer telephone on the wall. I have one or two of those, but I ran across this thing. This is one of the first pay phones they had, and I latched on to it. But the ones we had were up on the wall, and our ring was 3 rings. And if you were real lucky up in the day, you might get a line because there was 4 people on the line. And I had we had 3 of the long-winded ladies on our line. There was. It was all angels, sweetest people in the world, but all the day is gossip. Boy, when they got started, got the dishes washed in the morning, got the husband off to work, they got on that phone and you wasn't going to get it. Well, I know all of you know what this is probably. I take this and show to my school kids, and when I speak to them and put this over their neck and take pictures of them, and they just have a ball. Of course, that's a horse collar, a mule collar. We had mules. Everything we done was with mules. I didn't have any horses in my place, or Daddy didn't. But poor old mule, you know, he got to put that on. Then the harness buckles around here, and chains goes from there back to the plow or the wagon, whatever you're going to pull. And he pulled with the weight of his chest. The mule does, right? Just like that. How many of you ever used one of these? My mother had 11 kids. Not all of them was there when I was, but I was next to the last. Most of them was. This is washboard. She had an iron pot out in the yard, And she'd put them stinking clothes in that pot and put lye soap on it. And I had to boil them. Because we only took a bath once a week, and that was on Saturday if you had water. And he'd boil them clothes and take a rod and punch them and try to get some of the filth out of them. Then you take them, put them in that wash tub, and you get your lye soap and rub them on that board and wash them. Then put them over in the tub and rinse them out and hang them out. But I'll tell you what, that is not an easy job. I had to do that, but I'd rather do that than to do that ironing. That's the slowest, hardest job I ever had, and accomplished less. I didn't care for that at all. Of course, we always had to wear a straw hat, if we had one. If we didn't, we tied a bonnet on. That's the majority of what I got here, and I just wonder if any of you have any questions you want to ask me. I'll try to answer them. I may not give you the exact date or time or whatever, but I'll try.
How about the war? How was the war?
The war?
Yeah.
War times?
Yeah.
War times were pretty tough. I didn't go to the war because I got as far as a train station in Dallas and was wanting to go because my best friend had just got killed in Sicily. And but my daddy run the cotton gin and we was farming. And I got down there and started to get on the bus and came over the loudspeaker, called my name and went down there, and the man told me, said, young man, said, don't your daddy run a cotton gin? Don't you help him? Isn't he elderly? I said, yes, sir. Said, don't you raise cotton? I said, yes, sir. He said, that cotton is very important. We've got to have cotton for some reason. He said to make gunpowder, but I think he must have meant gun wadding. He said, you go back home and run that gin. But it was pretty tough. There was quite a few of the boys from Rowlett killed in World War II. As I said, one of my best friends. And at that time, you couldn't get automobile tires, you couldn't get gasoline, you couldn't get appliances. My wife and I married in '46, and we had to cook on a hot plate for a couple of years. We couldn't even buy a cook stove if we had the money. I didn't have the money either. But and gasoline, if you farmed, you got C stamps because you had to have gasoline to farm to raise food. That was very essential. So fortunately, I had enough gas that I could get back and forwards to the grocery store when I needed to. But other than that, I didn't. And when I wanted to go somewhere, usually I didn't have a car until I'd grown. Daddy didn't either. But I have walked to Garland and back many a Saturday night to the 15-cent show and really enjoyed it, thought I was doing something. And but there was a lot of things you just couldn't get that you really thought you had to have. But sugar, for instance, you couldn't get sugar. You couldn't get cigarettes. They got very scarce. And but they even got to the point of making sugar out of Bodark apples. How many of you ever put your hand on a Bodark apple and seen how sticky it was? They actually made sugar out of Bodark apples. It's very expensive, but it's better than nothing. Fortunately, we raised sorghum syrup. We had a syrup mill over on Dale Rock Road down there where Uncle Mac's buried, right there in them big trees. He had a syrup mill. Him and my daddy was partners. And you can take a bucket of sorghum syrup like this and just let it sit in that bucket for about a year, and most of it will turn to sugar. Well, that was our sugar during the war. We cooked with it, and we'd use it in our coffee and everything else. And sugar out of that syrup. It tastes a little syrupy, but it's better than nothing. But it was wartime was pretty tough. But actually, the Depression time was a lot worse than wartime. Back in the 20s and 30s, There was people in New York and other places jumping out of buildings every day, committing suicide and all. They were broke, no money, lost everything they had in the stock markets.
Take a minute and tell about the lake coming in.
Well, when you started talking about building the lake, of course I was here when they built Lavon too, and Mr. Sam Rayburn was responsible for that, and others, and that was a blessing to all of us. That provided us, Lavon provided water for 7 towns, and we were one of those to get water from them, but we had to buy from one of the others. We didn't have enough money to get in to join in the beginning, but they built Lake Lavon, and then when Dallas came along, we had water shortages, and they had to use Red River water and everything else, and it was terrible. It was too salty. It's picking up salt off the oil fields in Oklahoma, and so they decided to build Lake Ray Hubbard. We having our only tax base we had for the school and whatnot here was in land, and our best land was in the bottom where the lake is. We fought it tooth and toenail. I went down and appeared and debated County Judge Lou Stewart and made a fool out of myself and used some long words I didn't even know what they meant, and they was sure enough I said the wrong thing. But we fought it because it was going to destroy our tax base, but they tried to convince us that it would eventually pay off, and sure enough it did. The minute Lake Ray Hubbard was finished, prosperity began to flourish, and you can see what's happened now. It was a blessing to us, and just like, in my opinion, 190 is going to be the same blessing that Ray Hubbard was to us. It's going to be our economic tax boost that we've got to have. If we don't, tax is going to kill us. And but after the lake came in, well, it became a thriving situation. However, there was some bitter experiences in that lake. A lot of the poor folks and the widows and others, they were taken advantage of and took their land for practically nothing. Turned right around and went down here, and one of the richest men in Dallas County had thousands of acres down here, and they paid him 1,000% more than they paid the others. And I guess that happens in all situations like that. But that was one of the sad parts of it. But all in all, it's been a great blessing to us.
All right, let's give Mr. Schrade. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate getting to come talk to you. Like I said, I like to talk, and I feel real honored to speak to such distinguished people. My land, you got bankers, teachers, and people in here, and I ain't nothing but an old farm boy.